Hello. I found this alongside the road 2 years ago. It was a blown out truck tire, probably from a cement truck. And I was really, really excited. I see potential in items. I collect car tires. I collect car hoods. They are loaded with potential. They're a great source of material. I really like the old vehicles, the old cars from the 40s and 50s, VW Beetles with the curvilinear shapes and fenders. And last year I collected probably 15 old vehicles. They're starting to disappear these days. Our heritage and history is getting hauled away for scrap at an alarming rate. But this is the type of material that I work with most of the time. People bring me things. I really don't go out looking for it anymore. It comes to me. I've inspired people with my work over the years, and they're inspired to keep things. So I get phone calls quite a bit. Come and pick up this stuff. We saved it for you. So I can't deny that. I got to go pick it up. So last year I went through a move, and I moved my shop across the highway. And I spent 1 month just packaging and moving things. I didn't do anything else but move. And this is still all in my studio right now. I still have to process it and put it away. But it's material. I use a lot of cookware, kitchenware, that old aluminum that you really shouldn't be cooking on anymore. That's my prime source of material. I also collect cans. Several years ago, I collected all of the cans from the local school hot lunch program. I'd get like 3 big sacks every week. And the kids and I would cut the ends off, and we'd snip them down the sides and put them into rings. I really didn't know what I was going to do with them, but it's material, and it's everywhere. And people throw things out. People throw away cans. They don't even recycle them a lot of the times. I also collect beer cans. Here in the UP, beer cans are a natural resource. And I can't help but collect them because I make things out of them. I make beer can fish. You know the old adage, give a man a fish, he has a meal for a day. Well, teach him how to make beer can fish, and he can feed his family for a lifetime. So I experiment. I use cardboard, I use shoe leather, I use all kinds of things. But beer can fish are a prime source of my livelihood and how I feed my family. I also make like blues rock bands from Texas out of beer cans, soup cans. Most of the time, though, I create wildlife. I interpret my surroundings. I live in the woods, and I make a lot of creatures, a lot of animals. And I utilize the things that my family and friends and neighbors throw away that they don't want, screw it all together, and try to interpret my surroundings. Deer are a big part of my life because they're always running out in front of me at the most inopportune time, and they eat my garden, and every now and then I even eat them. So when I create work, I try to capture a personality or a character, you know, to try to have some life. That I think if I can capture the spirit or the beauty, then I'm onto something. So in order for me to explain this, I'm going to take you back to my beginning. And I was born in Dearborn, Michigan. And I thought I had a normal childhood. I was the youngest of 4 sons. So I grew up around motorcycles and cars. There was always something happening in the garage. My older brother, he was always working on cars. He was pretty good at constructing them, but he was even better at deconstructing them. He could roll those things end over end over end. And with the help of my father, he could rebuild it. And that just kind of blew me away as a young child to see this destruction and then rebirth again. And it happened. It continued. There was a cycle happening there. He ended up selling that black one, and he got this. And unfortunately, it passed down through the brothers, too. Everybody had their turn at deconstruction. And it made a big impact on me, no pun intended. Another big influence on me was my uncles. I had 2 uncles that were home builders. So I grew up watching homes being built, the hole being dug, the concrete being poured. They did everything, the electrical, the plumbing, everything. So I grew up steeped in that. Another big influence on me was I grew up in the Detroit area, and in the late 60s, early 70s, the place was on fire. It was civil unrest. There was riots happening. So my father would pack up the family, and we'd come to the UP. And for me, it was the greatest thing in the world because I got to go to Grandma's house, and I got to go canoeing, and I got to go fishing. This is the first fish I ever caught. What an experience to travel around the UP, see the sights, to go camping, to experience Lake Superior. All huge, huge influence on me. But the thing that really stands out most in my mind is when we were traveling to the UP or traveling back, I would always bug my parents to stop in Grayling so I could see this Paul Bunyan. It fascinated me. I took this picture when I was 13, and I got out, and I realized at that time that this thing was composed mostly of car hoods. I never looked at a car hood the same again in my life. And this, I grew up 2 miles away from the Uniroyal Tire, and every time that we drove by it, my face would be plastered to the window looking at this. This was a huge inspiration to me, and it made me think big. And at that time, I remembered telling my family I wanted to put big tires on my bike. They were like, no, you can't put big tires on your bike. I'm like, well, you can go through snow and sand, and it would be great. And they're like, no, you can't do that. They'd be too big and too heavy. And now look around, there's big tire bikes everywhere. You know, it's the latest phase. So the biggest thing in my life, though, was my father. And unfortunately for him, he grew up an orphan. So he grew up really poor, him and his siblings, but they learned to make do. And I think a lot of that was passed on to me through him, making do with what you have. So one of my first projects, my brother gave me a box filled up with mini bike parts. And with the help of my father, we put this thing together. And I rode it around nonstop for a year. And when I broke the frame on that, I built this contraption. I wanted to make a trike. And so I took the motor off, and I built this wooden frame, and I cut up a bike, and it failed miserably. It didn't work, but there was a lot of learning experience there. So another big influence was this vehicle. I bought this with my father when I sold that mini bike. It was a 72 Dodge van. There was nothing left to the bottom of it. The whole thing was rusted out. And I watched him with a pair of tin snips and some old ductwork, and he totally rebuilt the bottom, did all of the sheet metal, over like the course of a month. And watching him do that really made a lasting impression on me. So as soon as I was old enough to drive, I started doing the same. This was my first vehicle on my own, and I started working on it. And at this time, I was in high school. And when I was in high school, I got to tell you, my art teacher pushed me. She really wanted to get an art scholarship to New York City for me. And I was so excited. I told my family, and they're like, no, you can't do that. You can't make a living as an artist. And I listened to them. So I ended up dropped out of art, took the pre-science classes, and I guess my creative outlet was working on vehicles. I would work on vehicles till 2, 3 at night. I was going to community college then after school, and I was falling asleep during calculus class. So I made it through community college, continued working on vehicles, and came up to Michigan Tech, 1988. This is looking out my back window, just down the road, about a mile. And I spent a lot of time driving around the back roads, visiting every town, picking apples, looking at the scenery. And every weekend, every Thursday, I'd have my Comet packed up outside, ready to go, and I'd go visit my buddy Goober over by Munising. We'd go to hunting camp. And needless to say, I was in the fog at that time. My grades were horrendous. At that time, I had a .04 grade point going here at Tech. I had the worst grades on campus. So unfortunately, they cut out my grants and scholarships. I had everything paid for, but they're like, Mr. Branstrom, it's not going to work. So that was a turning point. That was when I saw the light. I had to leave up here, unfortunately, but I went to NMU. I started taking art and design classes, and I started drawing. I was in illustration for the first year. I thought that's what I wanted to do. Then I got into woodworking, turning. Then I I was the first student in the product design course. So I started making models, maquettes, and then turning them into larger life-size scale models using paper and conduit and cardboard, and then transforming that into steel. And here is a prime example of the found objects creeping in. The outer rim was the same diameter as the size of a 10-speed tire. So I couldn't deny that. I continued working with wood, making furniture, steam bending and laminating, making tables. But I couldn't stay away from found objects, and I got into jewelry for a while. And I made these earrings, and they were very well received. People really liked them. Are they coral? Are they shell? And then when I told them, no, they're deer hooves, they didn't go over so well. I couldn't help but not work with items that were available, that were discarded, that nobody wanted. I couldn't stay away from them. Another prime example, I thought when the deer hoof earrings failed, I thought I'd work with burdocks. I put together a burdock basket. That didn't quite go over so well either. My hands weren't proper for about 2 months after that. And I got into furniture, incorporating found objects, things from my childhood, things from my current life, things from people's lives around me. And this was one of the first large-scale things that I made when I was still in school. Rusty the dinosaur, people called it. And it started with the child's pedal car for the head. My friend found that in the woods, and I thought it looked like the nostrils of a dinosaur. So after school, I continued to work large. But I thought about the material that I was working with. If I was going to make a fish, why not use oil drums and gas tanks and tires and culverts? And I took the show on the road. I started doing shows and festivals, and I was pretty well received. But at that time, my father became ill. He ended up coming down with brain cancer. So I took that. I was the only one out of the siblings that didn't have a job or a life per se. So I was able to help my mother out. And during that time, I turned to sculpture as a form of release, as a form of dealing with things. And I continued from there on out. I realized that life is short, and you really need to do what you want to do, what you have passion for. So I challenged myself. Working with car bumpers and snowblower directional chutes and pipe to, in this case in particular, to make the female form. And very challenging, but I was getting results. So I kept on down the path. And nowadays, I tend to look at relationships of people, myself, and us as people with nature, the environment. And I think things are starting to take flight now. I need to tell you about this. This thing right here changed my life. It is an exhaust portal from probably a Grand Am vehicle. I thought it looked like a dog snout. So I chose to make a dog, and I have a tree that I got in a terrible accident a few years ago. And I'm lucky to be standing here in front of you. And the tree that I ended up wrapping my Jeep around, I wanted to use as a dog leg, but just a straight stick like that, it doesn't look like a dog leg, so I figured I'd go out and find a dog leg tree. So I found this, and I didn't plan on using it like this, but it had toes on the bottom that I couldn't deny. So this piece made me utilize it like that. I couldn't flip it around and use it another way. So I ended up constructing 3 other legs with it and put together a base for a dog. And I needed to find and make a head for it. So I laid out all this material in my driveway, and I found these old truck fenders that had eyeballs, had headlights in there that were really good eyes. I couldn't deny this. I found these 3 things in 1 minute, just set them together like that. And I said, that's a darn good head. So I worked on it. And this came together, and although this was all inspired by that exhaust portal from that car, it didn't quite work right on the head. So I ended up using a bike seat And I thought that was even better because you think about it, seats where you sit and put your butt, and dogs are always sniffing and poking, and so I thought that really made sense. So I hoisted it up in the air, and I knew I was onto something then. And if I could make the tail, and if I had the nose and the tail, I could fill in everything in between. So one night at 11 o'clock, when I took this picture, this is when the piece came alive. I mean, I felt that it had energy to it. And my house is several hundred yards away from where I was working. And when I turned to walk up to the house in the dark, I thought that this thing could actually chase after me. There was that much life. It actually made the hair stand up on end. So to utilize things that are discarded, things that nobody wants, things that, they could get ground up and turned into scrap metal, but to utilize those things and to create something that has a personality, a life, that's my biggest challenge, to look at stuff, to see potential, and to do something with it. My whole focus was to make it down to the art prize show 2 years ago. And I set aside the whole summer, and I took a big chance. This was my whole focus. And I must point out that all those cans that I'd been saving, they worked really great to make a big ball. That's like 300 of them all screwed together to make a hollow ball. So I made this dog, and people came by the tens of thousands, and I inspired many people. And this slide, you can see that car tire that I picked up, or the truck tire on the road, made the perfect choker collar for a dog. So you can see why I was so darned excited. And thousands, tens of thousands of people came. And I met the folks from Baker College in Allen Park. And they were looking for a Michigan artist. They were looking for a sculpture for their campus. And they thought Rusty the dog was the perfect candidate. It embodied the spirit of Michigan, the upper and the lower peninsulas, the natural tree legs and the automobile parts. And the crazy thing is, and there's huge symbolism too, this tire that inspired me so much, the campus of Baker College encompasses that. The Rusty the dog ended up just a bone's throw away from this tire that was one of the biggest influences on my life as a child. So I guess the thing is that you gotta dream big, and that's all there is. You just gotta dream big and go for it, because sometimes it pays off. But you gotta take those risks. And Rusty the dog was a prime example of risk-taking that actually, it worked out in the end. So thank you very much.